ANC NEC descended into chaos yesterday evening after a resolution was put to the meeting that all leaders facing criminal charges must step aside in 7 days. This would ultimately mean that the Secretary General of the ANC, Ace Magashule, would have to temporarily vacate Luthuli House until the finalization of his fraud, corruption and money laundering case. ANC spokesperson Pule Mabe says the NEC didn't degenerate into chaos as reported by the media.
We have got our agenda. We dealt with all the issues. When at the conclusion of the National Executive Committee, we are then presented with decisions, a recordal of decisions for ratification. Once the NEC ratifies decisions, which has been practiced, then the President will then do the closing address. The plan would have been to have the closing address of the President open to the media as well. I sit in that National Executive Committee. I don't know of any SG matter that came up because we don't have the issue of the SG on the agenda of the National Executive Committee. Safe to say that when the NEC concludes later this evening, it will be able to communicate its decisions.
Political analyst Professor Mcebisi Lechana says even if those who are charged with corruption refuse to step aside, there is little that they can do because the decision has been passed.
The decision itself has been taken. I'm assuming that once they start again around 5, it's simply a question of making that formal announcement. He can't just refuse. He's a member of the NEC. So if the committee says you must step down, you have to step down. He can't force his way into Luthuli House when he's told that he's no longer welcome. So the fact that he says no really doesn't mean anything. The committee has taken a decision that is binding to everybody, and what they can do is simply lock him out. I mean, you don't force your way into Luthuli House. If you are not wanted, you're not wanted. You have security there. They can lock the office. They can not allow him into the building. So it's really a straightforward matter.
A defiant ANC Secretary General Ace Magashule has on the record said only a special national conference will tell him to step aside and no party leader will do so.
I've never seen one individual in the ANC deciding for us. It will never happen whilst we are there. It doesn't matter who you are, how important you are, how educated you are, how rich you are, how poor you are. This ANC is an organization of branches of the ANC. That is why I will respect the voices of branches. If branches say I must step aside, I was elected by branches at conference. I will go back to a special conference and the branches must say to me, Comrade Magashule, step aside. I will then do so because it will be coming from the basic unit of ANC, the branches which voted for us at conference. Nobody and nobody can remove us. Nobody, comrades. I'm not a product of the media.
The ANC is preparing to go to regional and provincial conferences across the country. Leaders who step aside during the preparations of these conferences will not be eligible for election. Samkele Maseko, SABC News, Johannesburg.
All right, we'll speak very shortly to SABC News political reporter Samkele Maseko. But first, let's take a look at this clip.
And the last point, I think as officials in the morning, after the debates on this integrity thing, I don't know who has inserted the step aside and 7 days and all that. It was not there in the statement which I have seen and have agreed upon, because we said this is a matter. And earlier on, DSG will remember we said the officials will announce that part because we still have to consolidate the reports of the Integrity Committee and process them as it was actually suggested, including that part of Zwelumthize. So as to who added, I was asking Andres, who added this part of step aside 7 days and all that? That's not what we have agreed on.
All right, let's get more on that. SABC News Political reporter Samkele Maseko joins me now live. Sam, I understand that clip was before the ANC NEC meeting had descended into chaos. Talk to us a bit about that. And when Magashule said he disagreed with the NEC statement that was being read by the ANC President Cyril Ramaphosa.
Essentially, Griselda, with that clip, it tells you during the time, it was just about 20-30 minutes before we were going to be led in as media organizations into the ANC NEC meeting for the closing remarks of the ANC President Cyril Ramaphosa. That was the time that the president was doing what is normally done in the African National Congress by the president, just to essentially go through the resolutions and decisions that have been taken by the NEC by reading the NEC statement and having the closing remarks of the NEC to the meeting. And when the president went on to the point of the step aside for 7 days of those ANC leaders who are charged with fraud, corruption, money laundering and racketeering, that's when the ANC SG, with that clip that we've just played now, interjected and said that this is not the ANC NEC statement that they had deliberated upon and agreed upon as the ANC top six to present to the National Executive Committee, and he does not agree with this step aside of issue that those who are charged with corruption must step aside within 7 days, particularly with those reports that have been presented to the National Executive Committee of the ANC, including that of the ANC SG having to step aside immediately with that December report of the Integrity Commission. He then goes further to say that the Integrity Commission will also add the issue of the Minister of Health, Dr. Zwelini Mkhize, on the issue of that contract that was given to Digital Vibes that linked to one of his aides, Tehera Mata, who works closely with the MEC with the Minister of Health rather in the country. But essentially, that clip of the SG saying that it disagrees with the ANC NEC statement, that's when the NEC meeting descended into chaos. That's when some NEC members decided to sway one another. That's when decorum of the leader of society in the meeting degenerated into chaos. No matter how much Pulemabe, the spokesperson of the ANC, tries to spin, the meeting of the governing party descended into chaos. Others were swaying one another. Gwede Mantashe, the national chairperson, had to cut that meeting after a request by Chupuma Tabata, the premier and chairperson of Limpopo, for an adjournment for the NEC, for the top six to have their own caucus.
Well, I guess it begs to ask the question then, Samkele, when the NEC resumes this evening at 7 p.m., is it speeding ahead with the step-aside resolution within 7 days?
The issue of the step aside within 7 days is now being deliberated upon within the National Executive Committee. The NEC will deliberate on this particular matter. They will have to come to a conclusion. We do know that there are some who are calling for an adjournment of about 14 days from the National Executive Committee to reconvene in 2 weeks to deliberate on this particular issue. That was shot down in the NEC yesterday evening, saying that they must reconvene today. Thus, they've decided to reconvene in 45 minutes at 7 o'clock this evening to deliberate on this issue of step aside within 7 days. There are some who are adamant that those who are charged with fraud, corruption, money laundering and any other serious charge in South African courts of law, they must step aside within those 7 days or face suspension. The line was pretty clear, and you would remember, Griselda, when Joel Nachitenze, the ANC policy guru, pinned down that particular letter of the ANC SGO, that was essentially laying the foundation for what would transpire over the weekend, particularly if you look at the historical context of the office of the SGO that was given by former president of the ANC, former President Mbeki, on Saturday, and saying that the ANC SGO is at its all-time weakest as compared to the caliber of leaders who've held that particular office in yesteryear, like Dumanokwe. It's a far cry to what the ANC is at today with that SGO office, and essentially laying the foundation for all of those who are charged with corruption to step aside with immediate effect, and particularly after the issue of the ANC's NEC that took place last year in September with the president of the ANC in that broadcast closing, saying that the line in the sand had been drawn and that all of those who are charged in the South African courts of law must step aside. That's when the likes of Bongani Bongo contemplated stepping aside.
But Sam, are those who were charged willing to step aside? In that clip that you had in your package, the ANC Secretary General in Bloemfontein last year said he would only step aside in a special national conference. Is he still of that view?
Whether he's still off that view is particularly now being detailed in that clip that we've just played with him, saying that they had not agreed to step aside of those who are charged with corruption or charged with African courts to step aside within 7 days. It essentially tells you that in his mind he's probably thinking, nah, I'm not going to step aside, and easy. Those are some of his views that he has. He spoke in Bloemfontein and said that only a special national conference will tell him to step aside, because he was elected by branches of the ANC, and it is branches in a special national conference that will tell him to step aside. Other leaders of the ANC have shared similar sentiments. Some have even threatened to go to court on the unconstitutionality of the step aside resolution of the African National Congress, saying that it's not in line with the Constitution of the Republic of South Africa, which is the supreme constitution of supreme documents that all political formations and all South Africans live under within this particular country. So this issue of step aside is going to be a political and legal hot potato in future, should an ordinary branch member of the African National Congress decide to approach a court of law to look at the constitutionality of this particular resolution. The ANC had 7 legal opinions contradicting one another on this particular issue of step aside. There's one particular legal opinion by Matthews Posa of the African National Congress, who's also a lawyer, the former Treasurer General. He also formed part of this particular legal opinions that were solicited by the African National Congress. Paul Mashatile, the incumbent Treasurer General, was tasked with implementing these guidelines. Of recent, he has said that those guidelines are cast in stone and they will be implemented, contrary to what he had said about 2 months ago to Sakino Kamendo on this very channel in the morning, and saying that you may even find that no one would step aside on the issues that were being pertained, particularly around the Secretary General. You see how politicians flip-flop on their political lingo from time to time, looking at the political imaginations within the governing party.
Samkele, I'm sure you'll have the latest for us that ANC NEC reconvenes from 7 o'clock this evening. Follow Samkele Maseko on Twitter.